It's been less than 4 months since Peter Mandelson was forced out of his ambassadorial role in disgrace after revelations around his close friendship with international human trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, and we all thought that this time we'd be rid of him for good. But just like a bad case of COVID, he just won't go away, and this time he's back, penning articles for The Spectator. In his latest piece, you'd not be surprised to learn he's defending fellow Epstein associate Donald Trump, specifically his desires to subsume Greenland and his actions in Venezuela, and in it he makes some very dubious claims. Let's start with his opening gambit. Donald Trump's dramatic intervention in Venezuela has achieved much more than to bring a brutal, corrupt dictator and drug trafficker to justice in an American court of law, something which no amount of human rights declarations, international law, or indictments in the International Criminal Court were able to achieve. It took President Trump deciding it was in America's interests to helicopter Maduro to face justice, and this is the awful truth that Europe's political leaders are coming to terms with. Trump has the means and the will, and they don't. Right off the bat, Mandelson is immediately just accepting the US government's bogus accusations of Maduro's alleged drug trafficking as fact, despite no evidence having been presented in the indictment showing this to be the case. As for the accusations of Maduro being a corrupt and brutal dictator, many people share these opinions of him, and many other world leaders they have that opinion of as well, I'm sure. But firstly, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth doesn't believe in liberal interventions to overthrow dictators in defense of democracy. This is about natural resources. And second of all Maduro's flaws still don't give America the right to invade his country to abduct him to stand trial on US domestic charges. Now, whilst he is at least somewhat perceptive, in his article about the failures of the supposed rules-based global order and the toothlessness of the UN in a world of American unipolarity, the conclusion he draws from this are upside down. Take this statement about Trump's eyes on Greenland. The future of Greenland is being misunderstood. Trump is not going to invade it. He doesn't need to. He's already there. What will happen is that the threats to Arctic security posed by China and Russia will crystallize in European minds, performative statements about sovereignty and NATO's future will fade, and serious discussion will take over. Together, the US, Denmark, and other allies will address how the Arctic region is properly secured, with a considerably beefed up role and status and military deployment by America. Okay, if his claim that the Trump admin's saber-rattling around Greenland is performative were to be true, why haven't they just said they just want expanded military capacity in Greenland? It seems delusional to me to think that this is somehow about the US's Arctic security concerns against Russia rather than the expansionist aims of Trump's admin and their contemporary Monroe Doctrine. Although Mandelson's delusions continued when he praised Trump's negotiations over the end of the Russo-Ukrainian War, which essentially amounts to Ukrainian capitulation, which perfectly dovetails into abandoning Europe as outside of the Monroe Doctrine's US sphere of influence. Where Mandelson and I both agree is to accept that the US is not pretending to follow the rules it never followed to begin with. The difference is that his approach is one of surrender, where internationalist values capitulate to hard power, rather than using a united Europe along with our allies to repudiate Trumpism. But why would he care? Just like so many of our political establishment, he is beholden to America and the special relationship, and he's happy to import its politics to our country, just as the culture warriors of the right have been doing for years. It is funny that Mandelson dismisses arguments about sovereignty in his defense of Trump, the same value that Trump's sycophants on the British hard right hold so preciously to their chest. Weird how that value disappears as soon as their emotional support dictator discards it in his desire to snatch other countries' resources and land. That's not to say that their love of Trump and Trumpism isn't sincere, though. It very much is. The danger is that a feeble and spineless Labour Party that refuses to repudiate Trumpism will sow the seeds for the right to Americanise our politics. Both Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage have stated they openly want to copy the ICE in this country, which should terrify all of us given the events of this week. And what's more is that Starmer and co are very happy to set up the surveillance state for a future Tory or Reform government to use that to their own ends. Spy tech giant Palantir, named after Saruman's all-seeing orb from Lord of the Rings, has recently been awarded the biggest defence contract in British history as part of the UK-US strategic partnership that has offloaded even more of our democratic decision-making to the White House and their cronies. Well, that barely touches the sides on how scary this kind of integration with the British state is. Most of us by now will all be aware of the idiosyncrasies of Palantir's two lunatics-in-chief, Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, who I won't be profiling right now. What I want to draw people's attention to is this tweet from Palantir's co-founder Joe Lonsdale, which includes quite the confession. This is in responding to a tweet that says, "Commies aren't allowed in this hemisphere, and every one of them should be blown up along with their grave sites." And Mr. Lonsdale responds with, exactly. What did you think founding Palantir was supposed to be about? Now, whilst we must caveat that Lonsdale is no longer at Palantir, do any of us really believe that Karp and Thiel aren't still of this opinion today? Now the US is using its power to murder leftists is nothing new. Operation Gladio saw the CIA enlist stay-behind squads across Europe with the express goal of killing communists and socialists. But these kinds of people are now deeply intertwined with the UK's surveillance state, and given that the US seems perfectly happy to apply its domestic laws and power abroad to its adversaries, how long until the same is true for their allies? I have no doubt in my mind that this will be music to the ears of the headbangers of the UK right, and they will be happy to cooperate in neutralising left-wing opposition to the domestic brand of Trumpism. Do any of us seriously believe that if this were to happen to us, that the supine invertebrate that is our human rights liar-in-chief Keir Starmer would stand up to Trump? He's already been happy to sell off our security to Trump's Palantir pals and collaborate with Trump in what amounts to international piracy. Given the Starmer project from day one was the removal of the left from public life, you can't imagine he'd put up that much of a fight. The only way to protect ourselves against encroaching American influence is to actually value the sovereignty that the right wing only pretends to care about. We need total de-yankeification. No more American corporations getting government contracts, no more American asset management firms owning our real estate, no more American private equity firms owning our water companies, banning foreign money from our politics, and no more important American culture war nonsense from the think tank industrial complex either. It's bad enough being an economic and geopolitical vassal state for the US. Can we at least be spared having to do with cringy stuff like Doge or Zia Yusuf banging on about fentanyl and DEI, please? Or indeed, the proliferation of Trump-style red hats from Steve Reed and co. Dahlia, do you think we should de-yankify Britain?
I mean, Yankee go home. I mean, that's the real take. That's the hot take. But I mean, first of all, just I need to just read Mandelson for a second. Mandelson, the thing about Mandelson is and has always been basically a professional moral vacuum. Like, that is his job. And I remember when the stuff about the Epstein, the closeness of his relationship with Epstein came out. And there was a lot of pearl clutching amongst, Starmer and the British press. And, oh, how terrible. How could he? How could we have known? Mandelson was hired to be the ambassador to the US precisely because of the kinds of connections that he cultivates through his relationship to people like Epstein. And the bond that he is able to have with someone like Epstein is through to use his words, the secrets that they hold for one another. And so this idea that like there's some, so I'm just not surprised that he goes around crawling, looking for, the biggest, thuggish, dirtiest boot to lick. Like, that has always been his job. He's been someone whose job it is to basically just have absolutely no integrity, no principles, no morals, but to be essentially a fixer. So I'm not surprised that now that this is where the bread is being buttered, that this is where he is going. And when it sort of comes to the change, is American imperialism changing? Is this a new era of American imperialism? What's different about it? What's similar to how American imperialism has always been? I mean, there's obviously clear continuity. The US, let's say, has always been, ever since its inception, has always maintained this kind of imperial sphere of influence over Latin America. It's always... And there's several reasons for that. Firstly, it's a very resource-rich area, minerals, oil. And I often say, sort of the worst thing that you can be is a racialized person born on resource-rich land. Like, your days are just numbered. Like, the clock's ticking. If you're ever born like that in your second life, just cut the mic. Basically, so there's always been sort of an interest because of the resources, and also because Latin America has always had this very vibrant and at times very successful political, like leftist, anti-imperialist, socialist political culture. And obviously it's ebbed and flowed, but at the moment, we've got Sheinbaum in Mexico, Lula in Brazil, Petros in Colombia. So there is the US is always looking at Latin America and kind of calibrating and thinking, we always need to make sure that we have a plan B, that we have a strategy if things tip over a line that diverges too much with our interests for us to be able to handle. And, obviously it has historically gone as far as deposing leaders, Salvador Allende. It's not new to depose a Latin American leader because they won't hand over the resources that the US wants free reign over. And of course, as well, the US has always had military bases in Greenland. It's tried to buy Greenland several times historically. So in a sense that there's continuity there. But I think the difference with Trump is that what we are seeing is a return to a kind of 19th century style direct colonialism. Over the past 100 years, the main strategy that the US has used is this kind of, and what we call neocolonialism, is this kind of clandestine, use of, funding and arming sort of proxy organizations or sort of using the IMF, using the World Bank, neoliberal restructuring, trying to do it in a way where they can sort of wash their hands clean. Now, obviously, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan are exceptions to this, but trying to do things in a way that makes it look like these are just organic movements within particularly within the continent of Latin America, but also throughout Africa, embedding themselves in a more through the back door. Whereas this is much more of a sort of, it's a 19th century ideology of direct imperialism and direct conquest. Trump's war room, I don't know if you guys have the graphic, but Trump's war room tweeted out, here we go. So Trump's war room tweeted out this picture of Donald Trump straddling over Latin America in a clear echo of Cecil Rhodes, who was depicted as straddling across the continent of Africa. So it's quite an explicit return to a different kind of imperialism that is both more direct, that is more explicit, but also that, and I think what Trump's mind's eye, Trump's vision of the world, which is also very 19th century, is one in which the world is kind of carved up into these different spheres of influence that are governed by superpowers. China on the one hand, Russia on the other hand, and the US on the third hand. And what's interesting, and I think what's interesting particularly about the intervention of people like Mandelson and Farage, is what's different is that Europe's role is very unclear in that. Europe has at least for the past 200, 300 years, has been sort of the front line of imperialism, has been very much one of those superpowers under which the world is carved up. And it really seems to me that within Trump's vision of the world, Europe, NATO is kind of vassal state or bust. It's kind of irrelevant. And we can see this with what he's doing in Greenland. Now, I believe that Greenland belongs to indigenous people. I don't believe that it belongs to Denmark or the US. But in the eyes of Europe and in the eyes of Trump, him sort of threatening, after having done this in Venezuela, threatening to do the same in Greenland, it's a huge middle finger to Europe and NATO. And so what I think Farage and Mandelson are clocking on to is that the role of Europe in this kind of colonial global architecture is not going to be what it once was if in the mind's eye of Trump. And so they're like, I'm going to cut my losses and I'm going to go with the big dog who barks the loudest. And so if it's vassal state or bust, I'm going to pick vassal state.
I mean, that's true. What's so frustrating, like we saw that the real start of all of this when you saw was the tariff policy, right? Was they kind of just said that it was about bringing manufacturing back. It wasn't. It was about restructuring global trade to try and use the hard power of tariffs to force people into certain levels of concession. And there was a time when the European Union, Canada, Australia, people who are part of the kind of who emblematic of the old liberal order, the post-war kind of order, could have come together and said, no, we're not going to allow you to do this. We're going to show you a united front in response. And they just didn't do that. Of course, we were never going to do that. We were going to capitulate always because we are the number one vassal state, right? We have an incredibly special relationship You can see my tweets for further of my thoughts on that one. But yeah, that's basically the result of this, is that there was no unified front. Von der Leyen capitulated. Carney was the only one who really showed real kind of force against what Trump was doing, and he was standing alone. And eventually they've shown that they can get away with it. There was nobody who stands up to Trump, who is a bully. He's a man who understands, first of all, quid pro quos and business deals. This is how he views politics. He doesn't see it as a negotiation with a greater aim for everybody. It's about material interests for me and for thee, and how he can best leverage that in his own interests, right? And if you don't stand up to people like that, they will realize that they can take and take and take and take. And that's what we're seeing now. There's this element to which I think he's also holding the potential threat of Russia over Europe by saying, well, even though like the expansion of NATO influence over Europe at the behest of America, they're trying to say, oh, well, it's just been Europe taking us for granted. I'm like, no, that's you gaining economic and social and political influence there, right? But they're saying, oh, well, we can't justify this anymore because they've been spending on welfare rather than on the military, even though that's been economically useful for America more broadly anyway. And then they're going to say, well, because of this, we're going to threaten you with the removal of our support. That will leave you exposed to Russia. So you have to give us Greenland or we'll expose you there. You have to let us interfere in your politics because they want to explicitly back like far right, like neo-Nazi parties and neo-fascist parties in Europe, which are going to be more favourable to his administration because, first of all, they have an economic relationship, and second of all, they share the same kind of white nationalist ideology. And that's the way he sees Europe. I think that, because again, I think he's got this kind of level of affinity with the Europe of the past, and he sees the current kind of Europe, as he said, like this kind of civilizational erasure was the phrase that was used in the kind of new national security briefing, I believe, and that kind of what he views as civilizational erasure is why he feels Europe is in decline. He doesn't want to see it as part of his sphere of influence anymore, but he just wants to change it in terms of their own politics. What's interesting is I don't think that's going to work very well more broadly, as I think in some countries it's clearly more likely to work than others, but in the UK, I really don't think that's going to work. I mean, can you pull up the other graphic that we've got of the support for, this one. So if you look at the polling of how people view the Americanization of our politics, 60% of voters think it should be less like America compared to only 15% of ones who want us to be more like America. And there was other polling I saw that showed that we want to be close to Europe than America as well. And the only voter group who's even close to wanting us to be more similar to America is Reform. And even then, it's still negative for America and still positive for being less like America. Every other political party is totally against the Americanization of our politics, even conservative voters. I mean, it seems very odd to me. I mean, it seems to me that what we're going to see is a distortion in our politics from first past the post, where this tiny minority of like the people who respond well to Trump's politics could be in a position of great power because we won't fix our electoral system in the same way that it's only Reform voters who supported the actions in Venezuela as well. So if we want to ensure that we have at least got a political consensus within the public against this kind of Trumpian politics, we're going to need to reform our electoral system because it's a very loud, very irritating Trumpist minority in this country, where they're a big enough minority with a cohesive enough political project that they could have a lot of power.